Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za. As always, I'm your host, Michael Avery. Now, if you live in a city with fiber or 5G or Wi Fi in every coffee shop and a router that sulks if your speed drops below a gig, it's quite easy to assume that the connectivity problem has largely been solved. But if you step a few hundred kilometers outside of the urban bubble, the reality looks very different in South Africa. We have entire communities still struggling with patchy signals and slow connections, and in some cases, no meaningful internet access. And that really is a big problem in a world where everything from education to healthcare to banking to entrepreneurship increasingly rely on being online. That connectivity gap becomes an opportunity gap. And my guest today is someone who's trying to close that divide. Sthembiso Dlamini is the founder and CEO of Quadrupleplay, who's built a digital infrastructure business focused on extending reliable broadband into rural and underserved communities across the country. Sthembiso, great to have you on the show. Just take us back a little. Where did your personal connection to rural communities begin, and how did that early experience shape the mission behind Quadruple Play?
Thanks a lot, Mike, and to Business Tech viewers. Um, yeah, when you say rural area connectivity, that I jump out of the bed immediately because I know possibly that's the area or that's the market that has been deserted by most of our providers in the region and in South Africa, to be specific. So my connection to the rural area is basically because I grew up in a rural area myself. I imagined a lot of struggles that happens in rural areas in terms of infrastructure, especially roads, when flooding happens and all those sort, and see how we struggle, especially in terms of education and access to healthcare, just to have access to what's going on in town. And myself growing up and going to a rural school, you won't believe a story around. I didn't even have access to a library for even studying my final exam in a high school. So I had to rely on the information and notes that we took in class with the teacher. There was no reference. So if a teacher was not delivering the correct content, that's all we had. There was no other access. I remember when I was doing my final year in English, we realized, I think 3 weeks before the exam, that the English or the content that we've been fed is not the content that the exams council is looking for. So within 3 weeks, I was now, or I told myself to realign immediately to make sure that I still make it. And of course, is possibly the reason I got a C in English, just enough to enter university. So I have a very close connection to the rural area people. But Mike, if you think about it now, if you stay in Joburg or Pretoria or even Cape Town, and there's a time where you reach a certain age, possibly 60 or 65, depending on the customer policy, you are practically forced to go back to the rural area again. So where you come from. So it's practically an area where we all came from. So that's how the heart never goes away for me from the rural area where I come from.
Yeah, and that is a personal story reflecting a personal mission in developing this business to close that digital divide. Because, we hear all about the wonders of AI and the ability for that to maybe help in education, for example, deliver better teaching outcomes. But you can't do that if you can't connect that technology to the learner. And so having worked across South Africa and the broader region, when you look at connectivity today, what do you see as the real gap between urban and rural infrastructure in South Africa at the moment?
The real gap, which we've identified as quadruple play, um, it's so interesting um, why we still have no connectivity or meaningful. I think in South Africa, we spend a lot of time saying meaningful because there is connectivity in the rural area from possibly the MNOs in terms of your 4G, 2G, and 3G networks. But in how rural areas are structured and the infrastructure that's required to deliver those services to the rural area, you will find that. it's very costly for the MNOs because they practically use the same equipment or architecture that they got for urban. They just deploy the same. For instance, they'll just go to a vendor and say, give us 100 base stations, and then possibly some or five of those base stations is going to go to the rural area. Now, the equipment is too costly, and then there's too much vandalism in the rural area in terms of batteries. So now they'll vandalize the batteries of the service provider. And then what will happen is the MNO tower, when there's no commercial power go off, when it goes off, the entire community remains unconnected because the community relies on just that one tower. It's unlike in heaven where you find that possibly for a 1 square kilometer, you have about five towers serving that same area because of the capacity issues. But in rural area, it's all about coverage. So you find that one tower is saving about 10-kilometer coverage. The moment it goes down, it means all those households or users connecting to that tower are currently offline and there's nowhere else to cry. So that's the issue that we found. And then what all we have to do was, what if we can provide fixed connectivity to every household? And you'll be amazed to see the uptake in the rural area in South Africa and how the settlement patterns are structured.
And so take me into the rural areas because I think it would be incredible for more South Africans to be able to go and see what that lived reality is. I often think in South Africa, a big problem today is that so many of us live in urban middle class kind of bubbles, and we don't connect with the lived reality of many people, the majority of whom live in peri-urban or rural areas. And if you're a professional, maybe slow internet means a bit of buffering, or maybe your Netflix connection doesn't quite work, or Teams call drops. It's annoying, but it's hardly life changing. When connectivity is poor in a rural community, I think the implications are far deeper. So, from your first-hand experience, what are some of those realities that people in cities might not fully appreciate about life without reliable internet?
The interesting part is most of the rural areas in South Africa, I think I'll say more than half of the rural areas we have, they got corporate people who come from urban and go to the rural for whatever consultation. Sometimes it's just consultants who are visiting maybe for 1 week or one weekend. And of course, those glitches of teams were cutting up and they can't do Netflix. They experience those. But I think because they would be going to the rural area for a short while, they just call it an experience to say, I was in the rural area and there was no connectivity. But it's a different ball game for the people who stay in the rural areas. Because the connectivity isn't there, they can't or they don't have the luxury of even going to teams. I remember in one school in Limpopo, for instance, the teachers were supposed to attend a conference over Teams, and it was not possible because there was no internet to connect via it. So by default, they end up driving all the way to Polokwane, which is the nearest town, and that's where possibly the meeting can happen physically. And just because they couldn't connect to an internet connection that exists, because possibly there's no internet connection that they could use that can carry team. So for me or you or someone from the urban going to the rural area just for a short while, we don't feel the pain. We practically move away immediately, even if it's home. We just go there for a weekend and go back to the city. But the people who stay there, because they can't experience it, because there's no connectivity, they just don't have any experience around Netflix, YouTube, or whatever streaming media that we can talk about.
So there's a big opportunity. I think we've established that. You come along and say, right, how do we bridge this? Because rolling out hard infrastructure, building the physical pipes and base stations is expensive. So talk to me about the quadruplay business model. What lies at the heart of trying to bridge this divide?
That's a lot, Mike. I would say what happened is initially we just got exposed to work in the rural area first before we could even work anywhere else. So our first day of at work was basically in the rural area to do connectivity. Um, so basically, all we do, if you notice the settlement patterns of South African rural areas, especially in provinces like Northwest, Limpopo, and Eastern Cape, the settlements are such that the households are close to each other the same way in township and urban. So to connect a rural area in South Africa is basically the distance from the big city to the rural area. But once you are in the rural area, the cost of the technology to be deployed, either it's wireless, unlicensed Wi-Fi, or even fiber itself, um, it's the same. The cost is the same. The only cost is arriving at the rural area. That's basically the only cost. But once you are there to deliver, the cost of the material, the skills is practically the same thing.
Oh, so once you're in the area, you have those same density economics that you find in cities and more urban areas. So your company, I believe, is now operating across several markets. You're not just in South Africa, you're in Eswatini, Zambia, Lesotho, even California, I believe, which suggests it's not just a social mission, but you've got a really scalable business model here. What's been the core mission guiding Quadruple Play's growth, and how do you balance, obviously, the need to make money, your commercial sustainability, with the goal of reaching underserved communities?
Yeah, we are growing every day. Yeah, I just mentioned some of the markets we are. Possibly one piece I didn't share was I originally come from Eswatini, so I am a Eswatini citizen. So in South Africa, it's basically business that brought me here. Um, but when we started Quadruple Play, we started here in South Africa and then expanded backwards home, which is Eswatini, and then expanded forward to Zambia. And then just recently we have expanded went to Lesotho and California. So basically we're still going to expand further. The growth trajectory that we are following is that of long-term goals to say come the next 10 years, where do we see ourselves as Quadruple Play? Can we solve the problem of connectivity in rural areas, not just in South Africa, but in all other countries of the globe? And can we use the same method that we're using in South Africa? If not, what exactly do we need to change for all the other countries? Because, for instance, in South Africa, uh, unless someone tells me otherwise, we are really making business out of the rural area, and it's really working the same way we are doing business in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. There's just no distinction. The difference is the geographical location of the rural area. So we are kind of pushing the same model also in the other African countries, and then also going global. So what we believe in is what we refer to as leverage. So we practically leverage on an existing infrastructure, and you'll be shocked. Most of the infrastructure was in place even more than 2 decades ago in South Africa, for instance. And we work very close as a partner of OpenServe. So now that infrastructure, that fiber infrastructure for OpenServe is practically all over the country and is in all the rural areas that we are targeting. So the backhaul part that fiber plays is the most critical component that if we were to do it as Quadruple Play, our business model was going to fail.
That's fascinating. I was in Pigs Peak over December. It's just a lovely part of southern Africa. Love Eswatini, beautiful country. And I must say, I found the connectivity to be really good, even in remote, very mountainous regions like Pigs Peak as well. Just come back to that idea of partnering and OpenServe, because you've partnered with ministries, you've partnered with incumbent fiber providers to make these projects viable. How critical is collaboration between the private sector, governments, and existing infrastructure players in making rural connectivity a reality?
Yeah, this is the most, I think for us, it's the best and most important aspect of how best we have created relationships, mainly for these countries that we operate in with the Ministry of ICTs. I think what introduced us into managing to create these relationships is basically our involvement earlier, I think in the year 2018, from one of our sister companies in Eswatini called Touch IT to be involved in developing networks that connect health centers to each other. So that interaction with the government helped us to understand what the government has and what they're trying to achieve. And now it goes then to the incumbent operators, the telcos, the old landline phone companies. We were funded. I think most of them they started in the early 1980s, and these ones now have been building infrastructure over time since that time, and over the past 2 decades, they started 2 decades. They started developing fiber networks to provide backhaul services to the mobile networks that then started coming up around year 2000, and they were moving faster. So they would use the infrastructure of these incumbent operators for backhaul services to backhaul their services, starting from 2G all the way to now they're rolling out 5Gs. And you'll see that most of the time, this infrastructure is still going to be key in backhauling their services. But now what we found is this fiber infrastructure is underutilized, and it's a very big building block or catalyst for our ambition to do rural connectivity. Because all we do as quadruple play is just the last mile. So it depends on the technology in the country. The other countries, for instance, in Eswatini, we got a spectrum on band 40, which is 2.3 gigahertz. In Zambia, band 39. In South Africa, still no spectrum for us. But then in South Africa, because of the settlement patterns, we are striving in developing the fiber to the home network. So basically, that's what pushes us, and it's practically what then made this leverage of the existing infrastructure to be the best of what we can use to look forward as a company, not to lift ourselves only, but to lift the government-owned companies, which is this incumbent telcos, for them to at least have cash flow, because currently their current business models don't give them cash flow. Hence, they cannot expand and invest in the rural area connectivity. So we do this so that they can also look good and also talk about this initiative that we do, and also be participating and making money out of what we do as quadruple.
It just makes sense, as you explain. If that fiber line, that infrastructure, that pipe is already there and you're not utilizing all of that capacity, why go and build a new pipe or new infrastructure? Let's utilize what is already there and see how you, with your skills in connecting rural areas, can then work in partnership with the incumbents. I think one of the ideas that you've been speaking about recently, and just reading a bit more about quadruple play, is just encouraging professionals based in cities often to become part of the rural connectivity movement. What does that mean in practice? I mean, how can engineers or entrepreneurs or technologists and even investors contribute meaningfully to building digital infrastructure beyond the big metros?
I'll talk about this, Mike. I was boarding a flight on Sunday from Cape Town to Eswatini. So I was following a few guys. I think they were returning home to Eswatini from whatever trip that they'd come to Cape Town for. One guy was asking his colleagues to say, "Show me a CEO or an entrepreneur who grew up in town. Um, just show me one." So practically, what he was intending to say was, most of the entrepreneurs we have and most of the CEOs in big companies across the urban sector, they all come from the rural area. I won't even mention the partner that we have, OpenServe. You can just throw your eyes into the CEOs there. You'll be shocked where they come from. And it's so interesting when they tell the stories that even my rural area, as much as I'm the CEO of the telco, I also come from a rural area that doesn't have connectivity. And I'll be like, but seriously speaking, why can't we make sure at least your village is covered? Then we can let others not be covered. At least there will be discrimination there. But in reality, is even the villages from all the professionals that we got in urban areas and all the companies, different enterprises come from the rural area. So for me, it's basically to say, can we open our eyes? You don't need to go and build with us. You can just show us your village, possibly just keep an eye as we build your village and the infrastructure. So that's not to say we wish you to get older faster, but when you get older and retire, can you go and retire into a village that has reliable, meaningful connectivity? And you'll be proud to have participated in the process of making that connectivity to happen from your rural area. So I think for me, it's basically that call to say, let's all go all out there. As a sport rapport play, will build a business model, we show in terms of the ROIs to say, okay, what's the return on investment? Of course, it's not mainly for the return on investment and the financial benefit out of it. It's basically for the long term benefits that will spin off out of this. Now, suddenly the rural clinics can report to the regional hospitals in terms of what data is required, or basically the patient data that they have, and possibly extract data from the regional hospitals in terms of how best they can treat their patients. Now, school going kids, now suddenly they can study, they can go off to the Wi-Fi and be able to research and be at the same level as the club. So all we are doing is basically to say, us as a generation, the baton has been passed to us by our previous generation, but can we pass a better baton to the next generation so that that powers the global community? Because the whole global community is connected. If we have everyone connected and have access to equal opportunities, then everyone will have a better future tomorrow, at least for the next 10, 20 years or 30 years, or even our African goals of 2050.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk so much, Sthembiso, about inclusive growth in South Africa. What is going to unlock inclusive growth? It's this kind of digital transformation because it brings barriers down, it unlocks all of those opportunities in healthcare, as you mentioned, in education, in delivering other services well, but also in connecting entrepreneurs to global marketplaces and platforms. You just think of a Take-A-Lot, or if you look at the way the Chinese have leveraged that with their platforms like Temu and Shein and others, there is so much opportunity in this if we truly solve the rural connectivity challenge. And I think here, from an investor perspective, I mean, you mentioned some of the big telcos. The retirement funds and the trustees that sit on billions of rands that are allocating capital are that's their fiduciary responsibility through an ESG lens. They've got to think about what kind of world their members are going to be retiring into. And many of their members are going to go and retire in the rural areas. And do they want to be retiring in areas that are still underdeveloped or poorly developed because of this digital divide? So, if you could leave South Africans, particularly those of us living comfortably in our well connected cities, with one message about connectivity and our shared responsibility, what would it be as a final parting thought?
Yeah, that's a lot, Mike. Yeah, you explained at length what has to happen, and possibly just try to push it in the correct direction. Um, I think the greatest point is, we're not basically saying or blackmailing professionals to say, come build with us, or investors come invest in quadruple play because we're doing a noble cause of doing rural connectivity. It's not basically at that level. We're practically projecting value to be unlocked from the entire initiative. For instance, scholars of business will talk about blue ocean strategies. So to be honest, the rural market is a very big market. It's only the rural area market where a homestead, a Dlamini homestead, remain a Dlamini homestead for generations to come. There's never a time where you go back to a rural area now you find that the Dlamini homestead is now a Shongwe or a Simelane, and now the people have changed. So practically in terms of assets, even if we don't recognize rural area because of the land system of the country, that to say we don't, it doesn't give you the title deed or something, but the people who stay there, they stay there forever. They never change. And that's why every time we go home, you never find the home has shifted. So basically, our call, quadruple place to say, as much as our investment or focus is in the rural area, is to say, let's save the rural area more to make sure that there is equal connectivity, or there's equal opportunities for everyone. You think of something like in football, for instance, when the football scouts are looking for the best player or the next best player, you don't understand why they keep going to the rural area. It means they see something there. And in terms of entrepreneurship, now if as entrepreneurs we now have recognized that most of the entrepreneurs that we have in the globe, they come from rural areas. Showcase them. We need to go and look for them, and possibly the next professionals as well. If we know that now most of the professionals, the engineers, the nurses, and the doctors in my rural area, I was sent to do medicine so that I can be a doctor. It's me who then changed at university because I had enough of the technology. And then I was like, I think I can't fit properly to be a doctor, but maybe can I be an engineer at least? So then that's why I changed the direction. But most of the time, all these professionals, they all come from these areas. And then what are we saying as quadruple play? We're basically saying as much as we are deploying the networks in the rural area, in South Africa, our partnership with OpenSafe give us power to practically provide OpenSafe fiber as a trusted partner like all other SPs in the market to deliver the services to anyone. So possibly we do deliver the fiber to any urban in South Africa, but every time you see us in your house in the urban or semi-urban, just know that deep in our heart, we have the rural area in mind. So you will think why we do the connectivity, there is basically to make sure our cash flow is moving. And based on the cash flow, traction and equity from here and there, we can then take that cash and go inject it into a rural area and have one rural area at a time connected. So basically, that's what we are saying in South Africa. And possibly, what we're saying is the numbers, the percentages to say when you compare connectivity in rural area vis-a-vis urban and semi-urban, the rural area percentage is low. Our role is basically to raise that bar and see how best can we have at least more than 50% in the next 10 years of rural area connectivity achieved for the rural households. Thank you.
Well, that is an incredible mission, and it reminds me of an old Chinese saying of letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Well, let 1,000 rural areas bloom, and we will really unleash the economic potential of South Africa. That was Sthembiso Dlamini, founder and CEO of Quadrupleplay, sharing his vision for bringing reliable broadband to the communities that have historically been left on the wrong side of the digital divide. You can find this conversation and many more like it on businesstech.co.za and on the Business Talk YouTube channel. From me, Michael Avery, thanks so much for watching.